Welcome to the Coffee and Counseling Podcast, where two licensed psychotherapists give you their unfiltered opinions on mental health, wellness, life, and everything in between. It's real, raw, and ready to challenge what you think you know. Get ready for some tough love. Before we begin, just a brief disclaimer, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not take the place of therapy. We hope you enjoyed today's session. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Coffee and Counseling, where we don't spill the tea, but the coffee will be piping hot while we talk about all things counseling. We're your hosts, Rachel Steinhardt
and Stephanie Van Schaick, and today we're diving into one of the many misunderstood topics in mental health, depression. We throw the word around a lot, like I'm so depressed today, but what does true clinical depression actually and really look like? And how do we know when it's something more than just a bad week or sadness? So grab your coffee and let's get into it. Rachel, start us off with a high and a low from this week.
Yes, okay. I have an update for everyone. So I know that I said my kids were in camp, but what I forgot to mention is that in order for my daughter to be in camp, she needed to be potty trained. And so we are there, but we're not. Like the minute she gets home, she decides she's done being potty trained. I don't know what's happening, but you know what? Whatever. Like we got her through a majority of the day in underwear. So that's a win for me. Here is the downside to that. Here is my low. I should be celebrating because this is so exciting, but like we are in the process of needing to move her into a big girl bed. Also, so she can like go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. But this is the type of child, and anyone who has kids, you will probably know what I'm talking about. There are children who literally are so like hyper and outgoing that they will try to climb out of their crib in the middle of the night and do God only knows what. So we've had a tent to like keep her enclosed into her crib. And now not only do we need to remove the tent, we need to put her in a bed where she has access to run around and go bananas. And we're like, okay, let's do this step by step. So we just removed the tent. In one night, I think she left her bed like 15 times. She like climbed out of her crib. So how we're going to move this child into like a bed where all she has to do is literally get up and walk out is beyond me. I'm scared for myself.
Well, good luck. I could see she's a rambunctious one, very social one too. I remember she wanted to show me everything last time I was there.
Yeah, she was very excited. The kids actually asked when you were coming back. But yeah, they get like very connected and close to the people I bring into my house. So they really loved you.
Oh my gosh, I love them too. That's so sweet. Yeah. Well, that's a high for me then.
There you go. Feel that. So on that note, what's your high and low stuff?
Okay, so I would say my high for this week was finding a luggage set. I've been in the market for a new luggage set for a little bit of time now because it's actually much more difficult than you would think to get a good luggage set. Yeah. I'm like, one, I need to make sure that it's a maximum size that the airline's allowed because I need to fit as many things as I possibly can in that. I wanted a matching one, and I also didn't want to spend $1 million to try to find one. So I finally found a set that I liked and worked with all of the measurements. I went in with my measuring tape, all of that at Marshall. So I was super excited.
Oh my gosh, wait, what company? I need to know now.
Oh my gosh, I forgot already. I will send you a picture. It is in my garage right now, but I will send you a picture because I really like the look of it. It's not a hard case. I was looking for a hard case.
I want to tell you the hard cases, I'm completely convinced. Listeners, please tell us what you think or like give us your experiences. But I am convinced that A, they weigh more, and B, they have like no compartments. And C, yes. I'm completely convinced that they will break easily. And that they're heavier. But yeah, I've never liked those. I love the look, but I don't think that it's actually useful. You also can't like overstuff.
Yeah, and also with the luggage, whenever you check luggage, they throw it around so much that it gets really like scuffed up and all of that. I had a hard shell one and there wasn't a lot of compartments and it actually lasted me quite a while, but I need to retire it. So I was really so excited because I'll be traveling again soon, and being that I have to go back and forth to New York a little bit or visit and go around and travel a little bit more. I needed it. So I'll send you a picture.
Yeah.
And I was happy about that. One big thing marked off my to-do list. And then a low for this week is I would say that I actually had a pretty stressful week this week. And this is one of the examples of do as I say, not as I do. One of the things that as a therapist that we don't always take our own tools and employ them. We try, but we are also human. And I certainly overextended myself this past week, and I was aware of it. I was very uh, motivated at first, and I'm like, wow. And I was able to do a lot, but it was just a little too much, and I probably needed a little bit more rest than I had. So I was pretty stressed this past week. So I try to learn from it. I slow down and make sure I practice more stress management techniques moving forward this week, as well as being a bit less ambitious with my time over the next week because I needed a bit of a break and rest. So I would say just having more of a stressful week and not taking care of stress management as much as I should have would be a low for this week.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Stephanie is one of the hardest workers I know.
Oh.
And you definitely push yourself really hard, which is, admirable to a point. And then we need to take care of ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I appreciate those kind words, but also, yes, it's really important. And this is exactly what I would say to any one of my clients. And Rachel, you had mentioned it last week, like you asked yourself, what would Rachel say? Like how your clients will say that. And I always ask myself too, like when I know that maybe this isn't the healthiest thing or the best thing to do, I always say, well, what would I say to one of my clients? And wow, do I have much better feedback from my clients than I do for myself sometimes. And that's such a good tool, honestly, for anyone. Just even if you are struggling in some way, a lot of times people are harder on themselves than they are with other people. So one tool that I always tell one of my clients or any one of my clients is that ask yourself, like, how would you respond to someone else, a friend or a loved one going through this exact same thing? It's a good way to try to reverse it and bring it back to yourself. So it's a good tool. And here we learned a tool before even getting into why we wanted to cover this topic. So let's move into why we wanted to cover the topic of depression. So in the mental health world and conversation around depression, it's something that we assume that we know, and we assume we know how it looks because it's thrown around so much, it's talked about so much. But what we're finding is that we really don't hear many mental health professionals breaking it down. And we wanted to take the time today to talk about the different types of depression, perception of depression versus feeling sad, treatment, and risk of depression. And we're hoping that this session helps you to understand the difference and encourages you to get help if that's how the session speaks to you, or helps you to understand the struggles that others are going through. We do want to preface that we will touch upon the topic of suicide, so please take care of yourself and be cautious with proceeding. And we're not going to go into too much detail, but it will be a topic that we do brush upon. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, a little disclaimer is that this podcast session is not a diagnostic tool. So this is not to be used to diagnose yourself or anything like that. There are literally over 30 pages. I looked right before we started recording in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5. There's textbooks written on the topic, courses taught on these disorders. So we are barely scratching the surface. We'll be talking about some of the depressive disorders that appear in the DSM, not all, which doesn't mean they are less important. And lastly, not every disorder we talk about today is actually categorized under the depressive diagnosis section in the DSM-5, but we felt were important to talk about due to how the depressive symptoms show up. So before we get into it, I just wanted to take a moment. I pulled out my DSM-5, and please forgive the coffee stains. I had brought this around through grad school, through internships, and I had this thing that every single time I got a new book, I spilled coffee on it. So that's what, but this
very
is
fitting stuff. It's okay.
Oh yes, it's on brand.
on
But this
them.
is a very thick manual. So the reason why I'm showing you this is it's very thick, very heavy, and we can barely scratch the surface. And this is not a course on the DSM. There's obviously a lot more information on here. So we're just going to be talking about how this might show up for you to give you a little bit of a dabbling into the different types of depression or the different ways that depressive symptoms can show up.
Let's talk about what is depression. I think a lot of people find themselves really down, really in a dark space. And sometimes it's sadness and sometimes it's depression. And people really find themselves questioning, am I going to feel better tomorrow, next week? Is this something I really have to look, further into? So let's first talk about the fact that many of the symptoms that show up within the different types of depression, the different diagnosis. However, there are some nuances in terms of other symptoms, such as intensity, persistence of the symptoms, and a well a well-rounded understanding of the situational factors. So you really have to think about, before I even get into what some of these symptoms are, I'm going to paint a picture for you. Someone with depression is in a very, very, very deep pit. There is no light in there. There's no tunnel. There's no light. There's no ladder. There's no way to get out. They don't see anything outside of that depression. Now, here's where things get confusing, and this is just something I want to put out there before I even get into all the different types of depression. It's that you can be in that pit and still have moments where you're laughing, where you're enjoying yourself, and when you're living life, and that does not mean that you are not suffering from depression. And the best way I like to put this is like, even if you are in like the depths of grief, which we'll discuss later, but even when you're in like your lowest low, you lost one of the most important people in your world. A lot of the time, if you have a conversation with someone, especially in the Jewish world, and you go sit with them to visit them during Shiva, which is 7 days when somebody passes in the Jewish space, that we sit and we mourn. And there are a lot of rules that come with that. But a lot of times you'll go to visit someone and you'll see a moment of someone sharing a story or a memory, and they'll laugh, they'll smile. And that doesn't mean they may not be experiencing depression. You can have the both of those things coexisting simultaneously. And it doesn't mean that you're not suffering from that. But really, that place of darkness and helplessness, and just, I don't even see a tunnel. Forget about the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't even see the tunnel. That, I think, is just a picture to help understand what people suffering with depression are experiencing. Just that like drowning sensation. So, with that in mind, let's kind of talk about some of the symptomology of different depression disorders. So, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Again, that does not mean that you can't have a break from that and experience a different feeling. Markedly diminished interest or pleasure, significant weight changes, appetite changes, sleep issues such as insomnia or maybe hyperinsomnia, psychomotor agitation. It could be like an increased irritability or restlessness, decreased psychomotor speed. So you might recognize people moving really slowly, speaking really slowly, a true like loss of energy, exhaustion all the time, just an all around fatigue. Very often, people with depression are going to be experiencing a very low self esteem, feelings of worthlessness, uh, excessive maybe guilt or shame, feelings of hopelessness, difficulty concentrating or making decisions, recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal ideation, self harm. And a lot of the time, finding yourself in this space, it's like when we've talked about in other episodes, it's really that loss of functionality in day-to-day life. Like, you are no longer able to do what you got to do because the depression is just kind of taking over. And I kind of want to give an example of just something that happened to a friend of mine who was sharing this with me, and she kind of wasn't sure what to make of this. She was like, I've just been really down, and I've been really like not finding enjoyment in things I normally enjoy, which is a huge marker for depression. And she said, one of my favorite things in the world is to go out with friends and grab drinks and have dinner and just have a good time. And she said she found herself at a birthday dinner, just sitting around with all of her closest friends and her favorite food at her favorite restaurant. And she could not stop herself from consistently getting up from the meal and running to the bathroom and crying. And she's like, I didn't want to. Like, I wanted to sit there and I wanted to enjoy myself. And she like could not. She just could not stop the tears from flowing out. And that's a really great example of, it might not be some crazy scene from a movie when you're on the bathroom floor and the whole world is coming crashing down, but it could just be this, I can't enjoy this moment, or I keep finding myself crying. Things like that can also be markers that something could be up for you.
Mhm.
Differentiating between sadness and clinical depression, feeling depressed versus having depression, these are things that we really need to think about while we're having this conversation. And if you're finding yourself experiencing any of these symptoms. So here's the thing: sadness is an emotion, and an emotion can be fleeting, but depression is a condition. So one passes through us and the other one consumes us. Just something to keep in mind as we're going through the different diagnoses. Remember, like a lot of other things, I think we touched upon this a little bit when we talked about happiness and the whole conversation around feeling happy, and a constant feeling of being content and having joy. On the other end of the spectrum, you can feel sad and have moments of sadness, but that doesn't mean that you are in a state of depression.
And another thing that it was such a great example that you had given about your friend going to the bathroom and breaking down in tears, and that can certainly be a way that it looks. And something else that it can look like is numbness and
Mhm.
feeling like disconnected. And there's different ways that you can experience depression, and it might feel like you're checked out when you don't see that ladder or anything like that. So that's another way that could be experienced as well. And I did want to also just add on about the feelings versus the state. And you can feel depressed, and that can be a feeling, but that is not necessarily depression as a diagnosis. So you could feel an intense type of sadness that you might label as depression, as being depressed. But again, that's the feeling, and that is distinguished from the state of depression and the diagnosis of depression. So I just wanted to like extra clarify that they are different. One can be a feeling, but there is a whole different avenue, which is what we're going to be talking about, is how this can show up as a actual diagnosable disorder. So let's start off with major depressive disorder. Rachel had just given us a list of, not all inclusive, but a big list of the ways that depression can show up and the symptoms that are associated with it. And if you are struggling with any type of depressive diagnosis, you don't have to struggle with every single one of those symptoms, but those are some of the ones that pop up, and you might have a combination of them, and you don't have to have every single one in order to be diagnosed with depression. So major depressive disorder is actually one of the most typical disorders, and usually it's the one that people think of the most when you're talking about whether or not you think you have depression or you have symptoms. Most likely you're talking about what you perceive to be major depressive disorder. And the way that this shows up is that you need to have these symptoms for at least 2 weeks. This is like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual's condition in order to be diagnosed with depression, the major depressive disorder. And you need to have persistent symptoms that impair your daily functioning significantly. So we talked about this before. Rachel touched on it as well, that when any type of disorder, in order to be a disorder, the marked factor is that it significantly impairs your daily functioning. So it makes it hard for you to work. It makes it hard for you to have relationships. It makes it hard for you to have any type of social life, go to school. All of
Mhm.
those things can be really heavily impacted as a result of any type of diagnosis. And major depressive disorder is not an exception to that. So major depressive disorder can be a single episode, meaning you can have it maybe once in your life. When it persists over 2 weeks, then it could be a couple months, it could be a couple of years, it could be a few weeks. It will show up differently for different people, but it can also be recurrent. And that means that you have had, usually, I believe the marker is like 2 months at least in between episodes where you have a relief of those symptoms and are no longer meeting the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder, but then it returns. So that can happen if you have multiple recurrences of the episodes over the course of your life. Then you might be a little bit more prone to major depressive disorder and having those show up. So it can show up either way. And comorbidity is something that I also wanted to talk about. So comorbidity basically just means that this disorder can co-occur and exist at the same time as other disorders or symptoms. So when we talk about comorbidity, a lot of the other diagnoses that we typically see with major depressive disorder is anxiety, and it could be a diagnosis or it can just be persistent symptoms, trauma, personality disorders, eating disorders. This is by no means an all-inclusive list, and you don't have to have any one of these or a combination of these in order to have major depressive disorder, but it's not uncommon for these to show up alongside major depressive disorder, or really any of the depressive disorders that we're going to talk about. Many mental health disorders have high comorbidities with other types of mental health disorders, which makes it a little bit more difficult and complex to treat generally. Major depressive disorder, unfortunately, is often misunderstood as either laziness or burnout. If someone has never gone through it or doesn't have a very good understanding or basis for mental health, or perhaps just doesn't really believe in mental health, which we've talked about before, can be generational, it could be cultural, there could be other reasons for it. Doesn't make them bad, just makes them having different beliefs. But it could be mistaken as that, which unfortunately can make depression feel even worse and more isolating if you feel that the people around you are just not understanding, or you can even take this on for yourself and start thinking that, oh, I'm just not strong enough, I'm just lazy. And major depressive disorder, major depression, you could say as well, that is not laziness, that is not burnout, that is something diagnosable. It's something that significantly impairs the functioning of your life. And it's not about willpower. It's not about you doing something wrong. It is a diagnosis that needs to be addressed. And sometimes the misunderstandings can be because people who present with major depression can have different levels of functioning. So some people might look very high functioning for having major depression, even though when we talk about this can be confusing when we talk about that there are significant impairments in how you're functioning. You might perform well to the outside world, but just like you said with your friend, that Rachel, that you said that your friend was having dinner and perhaps everyone thought it was all great, and maybe she just, like, I don't know, had a stomach ache and had to keep running to the bathroom. So everyone's
Right.
seeing that, hey, you look like you're functioning, you're out to dinner, you're having fun, but
Yeah.
then behind the scenes you're having mental breakdowns.
And it's also so important for our perfectionistic clients who are listening. If
Yeah.
you are able to find it within yourself to get yourself to work and continue with your hygiene and do all the things that a lot of the time fall apart when a person is depressed, that doesn't mean you're not depressed. That just means
Mhm.
you experience it differently. Okay. If you are able to feed yourself and shower and go to work and do all the things, that doesn't mean you're not experiencing depression. That just means that the way that you're experiencing depression is a little bit different because of your personality type. And I don't
Mhm.
want you guys to feel like your emotional experience is invalid if you're still able to upkeep a certain level of functionality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And something that you're going to hear throughout, as long as we are here, that one person's experience of a disorder or a symptom has nothing to do with another person's.
Mhm.
And even though we can put into categories and we can label symptoms and all of this. One person's suffering can look so different from another person's suffering. It doesn't mean that one's worse, one's better, one's more valid or anything like that. It's just different. We're human beings and we have so many different ways that things can show up for us. So another important distinction is, again, this is not sadness. When we're talking about major depression, it's not just sadness. You can experience sadness, you can experience depression, and depression is appealing. What I mean by that, but it's more than that. It is a diagnosis that affects every part of your life, whether that be work, relationships, hygiene, decision making, sleep. It can affect everything.
So then we have, which is kind of like backpacking off of major depressive disorder, we have persistent depressive disorder, or what is also known as dysthymia. This is chronic depression that's lasting 2 or more years, but typically with less intensity than major depressive disorder. So a lot of what I was talking about before, where it's like you can have you could be, excuse me, in a depression, but still have moments of laughing or smiling or enjoying something for a moment, or having a breakaway where you're able to go out and experience joy during some type of an event, and then come home and just be faced with the exact same depressive symptoms. You might find yourself experiencing that if you have persistent depressive disorder. Um, so just some key features around that. It's more of like a low mood more days than not. It's, again, lasting for about 2 years, 1 year if we're talking about kids and teens, and at least 2 of the depressive symptoms that we discussed previously. A lot of the times it may present itself in a way where you don't even realize that this is depression. Some people that are experiencing this are thinking, okay, this is just how life is. They may still be able, like I just said before, to function to a certain degree. They might not be happy about it and they might be struggling, but a lot of people are struggling going to work, and a lot of people are struggling raising kids, and a lot of people are struggling socially. So the things that they're finding hard, a lot of the time, they don't know, may be caused by the depression, as opposed to someone who's just, living life without depression, who's generally just struggling with these things, because these things can be hard and overwhelming. Um, and, one of the things to think about in thinking that, and what's the difference, is when they're doing all these things, such as going to work or raising kids or making new friends, whatever it is that in the experience of doing these things, there's really little to no joy. And that's really where the struggle is. We often find clients struggling with this, masking it with humor or people pleasing or over functioning. So, again, for the perfectionists, there you are. I just called you out. Okay. That does not mean that you don't have it. If it's so interesting when it says, like, the one that's masked with humor. There was a video that went viral, and I wish I could like put it up right now, but I'm not that tech savvy. There was a video that went viral on Instagram, and it was so powerful. I don't know if you saw it, Steph. Essentially, you see like 2 men at a sports game every single day, and you see them in different outfits with different experiences. One of them is like, you know what I'm talking about? One of them is like cheering and excited and like so excited to be there and just having the time of his life, looking at the guy next to him, like his friend. And the friend is sitting there and he just looks like he's going to start crying into his arms. Like, no emotion, no excitement, no anything. And it just shows this day after day after day. And then finally you get to this day and you don't see the heads, you just see the bodies. And one body is missing, like it's an empty seat with the hat on it. And the other one is the body, one of the guys. And everyone's assuming this is the guy that was sad. Like, clearly this is to raise awareness about suicide. And this, one of the guy that looked upset was the one that took his life. And actually it was the one that was cheering and excited the entire time. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was just something along the lines of like, don't let the outside view of what someone may seem like to you fool you. You don't know what someone's going through. You don't know what someone's struggle is. And even somebody who's laughing and celebrating and seemingly totally fine, and that can even be a people pleasing behavior where they want to look like they're part of the group and, cheering on with the team. It doesn't mean that you're okay. You could still be not okay. And it's
Yeah.
just something that's really important to keep in mind, especially for anyone who's concerned for a loved one. Don't be so quick to brush it off if something in your gut is telling you that something is wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
That was I remember what you're talking about. And I think I only saw that once and it hit me so hard. It was so, um, I mean, it was very impactful. And I think that part of the messaging as well was to make sure to check in on the
yeah.
friends that seem fine.
Yes.
Because it can
Yes.
still be different again, it can look different for everyone. And some people will mask it and some people won't. And sometimes the people who mask it are the ones that need the help the most because no one's checking in on them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like carrying a heavy backpack every day. You forget it's not normal to be that way down, but after a
Mhm.
while, you just get so used to it that this kind of becomes your new reality. And that's where this disorder can become a little bit scary because people go on for so many years with it because it just becomes their new normal.
So I wanted to talk a bit about bipolar depression. So these are some of the disorders that actually don't show up in the DSM under depressive disorders. And but they do have a depression component to it, which is why we felt it was really important to address. In both bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, there are at least one episode of depression. And I'll distinguish in just a moment between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, and then we'll go into a little bit as to how that depression phase might look and how it might show up differently in one of these disorders. So in bipolar 1, a person has at least one manic episode. And this can include up to psychosis, but mania essentially looks like extremely high energy, perhaps someone who's like super duper talkative, that's out of the norm, very agitated, can't sit, walking around a lot, jittery, having very little sleep, maybe even no sleep, easy distraction, like easy to distract, having racing thoughts. You can't really hold a conversation because they're on to one thing to the next. Now, I'm not saying some people just have really high energy, but this is something it's usually out of the ordinary for most people. And if you know this person, you probably could get a good gauge as this is not typical for this person. So that is bipolar 1. In bipolar 2, a person typically experiences hypomanic episodes, which is a slightly less severe form of mania. And it can be really dangerous too because it goes unnoticed more because it
Mhm.
can just like high mood and like you're elated and you have like really high feelings of self and well-being. So it could be kind of overlooked. Now, why this becomes a problem is when we distinguish between bipolar depression, again, the depression episodes within bipolar versus major depression, there are some differences. Bipolar depression normally, like the actual depression episode, normally consists of more sleep and appetite issues than major depression. It usually has heavier feelings of guilt. There's usually more psychomotor, like we kind of addressed before. And psychomotor, don't let that word intimidate you. It really just means movement stemming from mental activity. And it sounds a lot more intimidating than it
Like if
is.
you're pacing back and forth and you literally can't stop, or you're having restless leg syndrome uncontrollably, or you're
Mhm.
consistently tapping your fingers, that is what Steph is talking about.
Right. So it could be like from anxiety or something like that, like coming out in a physical form. And it could increase irritability and restlessness. But here's one of the dangerous parts is that someone who's struggling with bipolar depression has a higher risk of suicide. And there's a couple reasons for this is that one, if you are experiencing manic episodes, you usually are more inclined or energized to act on your thoughts. When you might be in
Mhm.
major depression, you are less likely to act. Not to say you can't or that people don't. So don't take that as, oh, you're fine. No. But unfortunately, that is more of a risk for bipolar in this way. And also because it doesn't look like traditional depression, because you do have those high moods, it could be written off as like, oh, you're just kind of going through a time and
Phase.
maybe a little bit of a phase, an episode, and
Mhm.
it cannot be setting off the red flags to others as major depression might be if you are giving any types
Mhm.
of signs that you
Mhm.
are at a suicidal risk.
Yeah, and there's something else I wanted to add. In bipolar depression, there is also a higher risk of self-harm. And just to differentiate, because I know it sounds very similar with the manic episodes, the ones that are very dangerous, we're talking about things like gambling every single thing that you have, or having sex with like multiple partners when you're married and that's not something you would normally do, or putting yourself in danger because you're having feelings of grandiosity and you're like, I can fly, let me jump off this bridge. It's a very dangerous thing, as opposed to
Mhm.
the other kinds of mania where, again, like Steph said, you're heightened. So if anyone heard that and you're like, oh, I am in a really, really elated mood sometimes, like that's not what Steph was talking about. I just wanted to clarify that for a minute.
No, totally. And I appreciate that. And yeah, so it can look like major depression at first, but there are obviously differences with the heightened mood and the hypomania and the manic episodes. And also something with bipolar, I think that we really have lost the plot with. A lot of people will use this word and throw it around like, oh, that person's so
Yeah,
bipolar.
like a personality, like, oh, 1 minute they're upset and 1 minute they're in a good mood. That's not bipolar disorder at
Right.
all.
Right, you're right. It seems like people describe moodiness perhaps as bipolar. And actually, what typically happens in bipolar is that these episodes are longer lasting. It's not within like what we see in movies. Typically, it's not showing up like all within a day. Like, oh, you're going from one thing to another to
Yeah,
another.
it's
I'm not saying
within
it's never
months or
possible,
weeks. Right.
but yeah, exactly. Like the episodes are longer. So that's just something important to also say. And also, sometimes why it's misdiagnosed is that people usually will seek out therapy when they're going through the depressive episode because the other the other feels good. And when you're in a manic perhaps episode, even though you might feel like there's something off, you might recognize that, but it still feels good. Like you're able to be productive and doing all the things, maybe taking some riskier actions that are giving you some sort of reward system in your brain. And
Mhm.
when you do have the hypomania come up, it could be seen as competence. It could be seen as being productive, even by therapists. So
Right.
it could be very easily misdiagnosed, which can lead to obviously any type of misdiagnosis could be problematic because you're not being treated the way that you really need to be.
100%. And I don't know how much you've seen this stuff, but what I've seen constant misdiagnoses with is bipolar depression, and then borderline personality disorder, which also
Yeah.
has very high levels of depression. So,
Mhm.
and suicidality and self harm. And so it's very
And
scary. It's
recklessness.
very hard. It's just
Mhm.
I've had definitely clients who were misdiagnosed on the wrong medications, and this is not for potential clients to scare you. um, just do your due diligence in explaining your situation, your experience, your feeling, your thought process. And if someone is telling you, hey, I think that you align with this, and maybe, listen, maybe sometimes it doesn't sit well with you, quite frankly, because that could be part of the diagnosis. But if
Mhm.
something doesn't sit well with you, talk it out with your therapist, and just be really thorough on talking about your symptoms and everything that comes with it, because it really is it really is heartbreaking when people are misdiagnosed. I've had clients that after extensive conversations, I realized were misdiagnosed. And once we treated the problem, I had clients who thought that they were bipolar or had borderline personality disorder, and it wasn't either. They had major depressive with trauma, with other things going on. And so they were on medication that they didn't need to be on, and things that needed to be looked into and worked on weren't even being talked about, were never even mentioned. This is on you, clients, to be as vulnerable as possible and as open as possible about what you've been through, because when there is a high level of trauma that comes with depression, we end up finding ourselves misdiagnosing people left and right. And a lot of the time, it comes from a lack of clients talking about and validating themselves in some of the experiences that they've had. So, Steph, I don't know if that's something that you've ever experienced, but definitely has come up a lot in
Yeah.
my sessions.
Sure. I do see sometimes where I hear that a client comes to me and they disclose the diagnoses that they had before, and they explain why they got the diagnoses, and it doesn't really add up. And it's a good thing that I am aware, because it's something that we could talk about and figure out, where do we go from here. But also, I would say that sometimes it could be through what's being disclosed in therapy from the client, but also sometimes it could be coming from the diagnosis, I'm sorry, the diagnosing professionals background. So it's really interesting, because
Mm-hmm.
I worked with another therapist when we had shared a client who had transitioned because they were they were presenting more with an eating disorder. And because I had a relationship with this therapist, and one of my specialties is with eating disorders, I was being transferred over. And there was something, and I'm not going to give too much information, obviously, to protect confidentiality and all of that, but there was something that a symptom that was coming up for this client, and I said, "Oh, this seems interesting. Do you know if this person has had any history of like sexual trauma? Because this symptom can be
That's exactly
consistent
what
with."
happened to me, by the way, like 5 times. Yep.
Yeah, it can happen. And then the other person had said, "Oh, like we thought that maybe there could be something where this person was on the spectrum." And that's not really the way that I normally approach it. So it can come from different approaches.
It's
And not to say that I believe that both are definitely informed decisions, trying to get to the point of diagnosis. Obviously, we didn't use either of those to diagnose,
right.
but it was really interesting seeing the different perspectives from, this is what you work more with, so this is where your logic is coming from. And it was completely understandable, and it's like, oh wow, that makes a lot of sense too. And then this is where my mind goes, because this is what I work with, so I work with more often than not. So it can be also just where our frameworks are coming from. Obviously, we still want to
Mhm.
get to the same answer at some point, but we might at some points go to a certain diagnosis and think more in terms of that or
Yeah.
background than another, just based on our experiences too.
Yeah, and that's just the reality of therapists being human, like our own work environment and our experiences and what we're used to seeing is going to impact and create a bias around diagnosing. I wish I didn't have to say that, but it is a reality. Like if the same person went straight to a psychiatric unit to get assessed versus going through someone in private practice, they would probably get two different diagnoses a lot of the time. Not all the time. It's not like, so crazy where we're all on different pages. But when you have something a little bit more complex or something that takes a little bit more time to get to the bottom of what's going on here, that may happen.
Mhm.
And that's something, which is why Steph and I both experienced this. When you've taken the time to talk about your truth and your experiences and your traumas and whatever it is, your past, that sometimes it's even hard for the client to bring up or even remember. It has a huge, huge impact on how we go about treatment, how you go about understanding what's happening for you and
Mhm.
diagnosing and all of that. So just something to keep in mind. Um, somebody's going in for any form of depression or any other type of, of a diagnosis, just really try to be as transparent as you can.
Yeah, and also, just for therapists, be humble, because we are not perfect or experts in anything and everything. And actually, in this case, the other therapist, was more on the right track than I was, and that's great. Also, that's why it's also important for supervision, if you have any type of supervision, to bounce around ideas and whatnot, but to just be open minded that maybe you don't have all the answers from
Mhm.
the perspective as well. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Oh my God. I just like made me think of the song Humble and Kind. I don't know if you know that song, but like I'm like, this is Steph in a nutshell. And whoever doesn't hasn't whoever
Oh,
hasn't heard that song, you should go listen to it. It's beautiful. Um, but anyway,
I'll have to listen.
let's get to our next conversation, which is around postpartum depression. So all my mamas out there, and by the way, I really extend this to everyone who has had a stillborn, has had a miscarriage, has, you know, even if you've gone through like the IVF process and it's not working, it might not go under this category, but honestly, I think it should because it's just that experience of all the insanity that comes with either being a mother or trying to be a mother or all of that. And obviously, if we want to get technical, that can fall under other types of depression, but I just don't want anyone to feel like they should fall under this category and something's wrong with them because they don't. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, that to all the versions of mamas and trying to be mommies, I see you and I hear you, and I just want you to feel included in this conversation, I guess is my point. But for postpartum depression, this is a type of depression that occurs after childbirth, typically within the first 4 to 6 weeks, but it can appear up to a year later. One of the things that is the most scary about postpartum depression is if it goes untreated, it can actually turn into psychosis, which is something a lot of people don't know. It's extremely, extremely dangerous going untreated. When I've talked about this previously in a podcast where I was interviewed about this, but when you hear a lot of these absolutely crazy stories online of mothers doing horrendous things to their children within the first year, it much of the time is and can be a result of untreated postpartum depression. So that's just something to keep in mind. It is similar to major depressive symptoms and major depressive disorder in, that dark space, feeling like you're in a pit, the helplessness, the hopelessness, the worthlessness, the difficulty functioning. So that's just, something to keep in mind. There is a lot of the time also a very high level of comorbidity with high levels of anxiety during that. And it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, one makes the other one worse. And what comes along with this as well is also feelings of detachment from the baby. And some mamas experience this straight after labor and delivery. They'll get their child and they're like, I feel nothing. If this has been you or this has been your experience, I hear you, I see you, and it's valid. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. It is a symptom that can happen sometimes, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad mom, and it doesn't mean that you don't love your child. There is so much going on for you on a physical level, spiritual level, mental level, hormonal level. It's just so much going on. Give yourself some grace. A lot of the time, I would say most of the time, that will go away and it will change and you will form a bond with your child. I know that that's a huge piece for people and that really freaks people out. So if that's something you're experiencing, don't take that and run with the wind. Like, it's okay. It's something that a lot of people experience. But there is that guilt and shame that comes from not feeling instantly bonded or instantly in love with the baby when they're put into your arms. There's a lot of, and again, this is when I talked about the comorbidity with the anxiety, there's just so much intrusive thoughts in regards to the depression. A lot of the intrusive thoughts come in regards to, God forbid, fear of harming the baby, or like sometimes it's you're so scared of hurting the baby, and sometimes it's you're so scared that you will hurt the baby because you're just losing all rhyme and reason. And just for people to understand, this is not like, oh, you became a mother and now you're a crazy person. The period of time, and I touched upon this very briefly when we talked about survival mode in our survival mode episode, the time after you give birth, The amount of things going on for you is absolutely insane. And especially if you don't have not even support, but like a good amount of support, it is so easy and almost expected to fall into this space. You are completely sleep deprived. A lot of the time, you're also deprived of food because you just don't even have the time to feed yourself, which a lot of the time also is lack of hygiene because you don't have the ability to separate from the baby. You don't know if it's night or day. You don't have the ability to take care of yourself. You end up becoming completely isolated from anyone around you because your whole world is you and this child. Um, a lot of the time, there's a lot of resentment around the people around you if they're not able to be in roles where they're giving you the support that you need. A lot of the time, you feel incredibly distant from your partner during this time, and that can also cause elevated levels of depression. It's very difficult and painful. And, a lot of the time when I'm doing work with mamas around this conversation, what I find a lot of people struggling with is they don't see the end. When you're in that stage, and this is very in line with depression in general, is like not seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. When you're in the newborn phase, you feel, or, within that year again, it just feels like it's going to last forever. Like this is never going to, like, my whole world just flipped upside down. My whole world just changed. And I don't see how I'm ever going to get out of this. And I don't see how it's ever going to be normal again, or how am I ever going to be in a body I'm happy with again? How am I ever going to have a life that's functional again? And these are all very common thoughts and experiences and emotions in the postpartum space. I just want to be very clear in saying this is not the same as baby blues, which you may experience some of the symptomology. It's more short lived though. It's like for 1 or 2 weeks, like mild mood swings. A lot of that though may be due to the hormonal shifts and also simply can be due to the lack of sleep. I know with my babies, like the first couple of days, I literally didn't sleep. Like I did not know if it was night or day. I think at one point I almost hallucinated because I was so overexhausted. I turned to my husband. I'm like, am I holding the baby? Like that's how tired I was. It's a very scary space. And, I really, for the ones who are doing this on your own or with less support, you have to give yourself so much grace. It's so hard, and show kindness. And if there's anyone you can ask for help or anyone you can ask for support, please, please, please ask and let people be there for you and let people help you because, you know, many years ago, no one was ever meant to do that with no help. And now that we're in a world where we have so many roles and so many people are finding themselves doing it with no support, it's like beyond what the human experience is supposed to experience. So just be
And they
kind.
say it takes a village,
I was about
and
to say it takes a village. And the village, it's really like it's just crazy. It's a crazy time. Many women, and this is what makes this space scary and taboo. Just so many women feel like they can't talk about this. They're so scared of being judged. They're so scared that something's wrong with them. They're judging themselves the most and most harshly. I know a lot of doctors, especially pediatricians, when you're taking your babies to the first couple of appointments, they're giving you assessments to make sure that you're not falling under this category. Please be honest with those assessments. A lot of people aren't. Please be honest because that's an opportunity where if you can't ask for help, maybe someone can give it to you without you asking. So if one of the questionnaires says, I've been finding myself feeling a lot lower than normal, it's okay to say, yeah, that's true. It's okay. It doesn't
yeah.
make you a bad mama if you're not, in this like honeymoon over the sky in a rainbow baby phase. That's okay. It does not make you a bad person. It does not make you a bad mother. I just really, really want to emphasize that because so many people are not getting the help they need because of the shame around it.
Yeah.
And this can just truly be for you and for the baby a life-threatening form of depression, which really can it can truly turn into a very scary version of psychosis, the schizophrenia that can be very severe when it's gone untreated. Um, you know, just a tip for therapists too, if you're hearing moms talk about this, even in the slightest way, please normalize it and tell them, you're not alone. And it doesn't mean you don't love your child. For any therapist finding themselves having this conversation that isn't familiar with this space, or maybe hasn't had the mom experience themselves and isn't really sure what the right thing to say is, first of all, please refer them to someone who does know what that experience is like, or, is trained in it. And just normalize it, because for anyone who isn't aware, it is very common.
Yeah. And the next one that is important to talk about is the seasonal affective disorder. And this is kind of funny, and not to bear with me on that moving to Florida, this is something that is just like heads and tails. It's so different here as opposed to, as you know, if you're listening since the beginning, we're both from New York, and
Mhm.
I have such a different experience between my New York clients and my Florida clients, because it is like clockwork that I could say almost like every single one of my New York clients start talking about a dip in mood right around when like it starts to get like the colder time of fall, and especially when the clocks turn. And without fail, it's almost always an uptick in like seasonal affective disorder. Now, with that being said, seasonal affective disorder isn't a diagnosis in and of itself. I know we talk about it like it is, and for purposes of this conversation, I also will be talking about it as its own thing, but it actually is a specifier in major depressive disorder. So in the
Mhm.
DSM-5, that's how a lot of diagnoses are. It's like you have this branch, this tree actually of a diagnosis, and then there are different branches that you go off, and this is like, okay, this is a branch, this seasonal affective disorder. So it's a form of depression that typically occurs at a specific time of year. And I recently saw this map. I guess it would have to have been the last time the clocks changed, where it talks about how it impacts, or it shows how it impacts people throughout the United States. And it was very, very high in the north. And then as it gets a little further south, but still in the middle of the country, it's still a thing, not as much. And then down south, it's really not a thing, specifically how we normally see it, which is typically happening the season around winter time when there's less sunlight and all of that. So some symptoms of major depressive disorder that correlates with it is low energy, hypersomnia, where you might be your sleep is drastically affected. You might have increased appetite. And actually, let me go back for a moment to the sleep being affected. You might probably want to sleep more because it gets darker earlier. And I always bring it back to like biology. Like if we think about like cavemen days, we haven't changed too much since then. In caveman days, what are you going to do when the sun is down? You're going to sleep. And that's how our bodies react. So we go to sleep more. We usually have an increased appetite, specifically for carbs. Not only are they comfort food, but also from a biological perspective, they were intended to put some weight on us to keep warm throughout the winter, and we weren't usually having as much access to food during the winter because crops weren't happening and animals weren't roaming through town. So all of these things are actually very biologically driven. And also social withdrawal can happen throughout the winter time. And it often improves when everything starts to change again, the spring comes around. But I want to make this clear and put this out there that this is actually a very dangerous time for someone who actually has major depressive disorder, or any of the other depressive disorders, because what happens is that there's an experience where you feel even more withdrawn and isolated, because you could be looking around you and everyone who is affected with seasonal affective disorder is now running out, smelling the flowers, all excited and happy. And if you are not feeling that uptick, how you see everyone around you, it can make you feel even like something's wrong with you. And we actually see an uptick in suicides around this time because of that, the drastic depressed experience where you feel as though you are alone and there's something wrong with you and everyone is getting better and you are not. So please be mindful about that. If you are struggling and you maybe chalked it up to seasonal affective disorder, or maybe other people around you were chalking it up to that, and it's obviously something more. If you're not feeling better when the sunlight is longer and all of that, that just means you need help, and a therapist can help you with that. And so please know that, and please get help if that's you. And a lot of this we believe to be in the therapy world and from medical doctors as well is it's usually due to light exposure. Light exposure, sunlight in particular, is really, really good with our mental health, which is why you probably hear so many of us therapists say, get outside. If you could get outside for a few hours, I wish, a few minutes each day, or even go by a window with the window open. I actually have downloaded this app. I was taking one of my continuing education classes about sleep, it was on, and they were talking about circadian rhythm, and they mentioned an app that I'll put in the show notes that you could download. It's free, and you could point it to different light sources, and it talks about how many luxes. That's how you measure light, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but that's what I've been told. So you measure and you could see all the different light sources and how much lux it moves, it gives out. And daylight is a tremendous amount of luxes. I don't know if that's actually the plural word, but please forgive me if it's not. So that is very, very different. And when I downloaded this app, I was having so much fun with it. I was like pointing it at the ceiling light. I was pointing it at like a night light. I was pointing it outside through a window, and I was pointing it outside when I was outside. And even just the window took out so much of those luxes. So it's great if you could get it by a window. That it's definitely better than just artificial light. But if you can get outside, even if it's cold out, I know it stinks. And I know in New York, it's like not nice weather the entire winter. Basically, you get like 3 hours of sunlight the entire winter, it seems. So anytime you could get outside. But there's also what's called a light therapy box, and people swear by them. I've had a lot of clients try them and really believe that this is helpful. It mimics sunlight, and it does if you can get one of the ones that have over 10,000 luxes, that is something that could be truly helpful. And I would encourage you, if you find yourself struggling with seasonal depression, I know for myself, when I was back in New York, winter was tough. Or even if it's like a long period of time, I'm not getting sunlight. And my mental health, I could tell you, is a lot better too, being in the sunshine state. I'm not saying everyone should move, but sunshine is such a great therapy.
It's such a real thing. I'm so open about it, like with my own stuff. Like whenever I talk about moving to Florida, such a humongous reason among many others is this. Like I did not do well with lack of sun. It really does have such a huge effect on your entire state of being, your overall mental health, your overall attitude and mood. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And so any amount of sunlight that you can get, and the light boxes are a good option too, if that's what's needed, or you don't want to go out in the cold. I totally get it. Talk to a doctor before you do this, but vitamin D supplements could be truly helpful as well, because you don't have sun, you don't have a lot of vitamin D. And of course, therapy can be helpful for seasonal affective disorder as well. Now, I just want to also mention that it can be a summer pattern seasonal affective disorder, which is believed to be due to decreased melatonin, because the light, especially in certain areas, can be so much later that your body is not actually catching up to producing the melatonin needed to go to bed. So you might be sleeping shorter periods of time. And which we'll talk about in a moment, actually, that sleep is such a major factor in mental health, and it can really be something that's damaging to your mental health if you're not getting proper and enough sleep. But we'll get into that for a moment. But due to the worsening sleep quality, it can be summer pattern seasonal affective disorder, which isn't as common, but it's a possibility as well.
Okay, so on to our next. We have situational depression, which is also known as adjustment disorder with depressed mood. I talk about this in my sessions so much. And the reason I talk about this in the sessions is because I think a lot of people who come into therapy and are just so scared of the therapist diagnosing them with something. I always talk about this version of like, I don't even think this should be a DSM thing, not because
Mhm.
it's invalid, but because it's just like you're human and you're having a human reaction to life being completely not normal and completely overwhelming, and just you're having a normal human experience. And so this is something that exactly is what it sounds like when you are met with different situations, with different life events. And by the way, sometimes these can be potentially good life events, but if it's overwhelming enough, you can find yourself in this space. This could be a breakup, a job loss. It could be a promotion, by the way. It could be a move, which is something potentially exciting or horrible, depending on the type of move. This is something we see a lot with grief, which really could like be its own section. Um, but symptoms arise within 3 months and are out of proportion with the stressors, meaning like, again, and this is the part that kind of gives me the ick, because I'm like, who, it's so hard to decide like, oh, this is the normal amount of feeling, because these are all situations that essentially kind of put you into survival mode, which we've talked about. And survival mode looks a lot like major depressive disorder. It looks a lot like finding yourself in a depressive state. So I, as a therapist personally, to be honest, I struggle with this piece because as far as I'm concerned, like, if you find yourself in a crazy life situation, you just lost someone because of breakup or a death or a job that was sustaining your entire family or whatever it is, and you don't even know which way is up right now, and your whole earth just crumbled beneath your feet. I think it's completely normal for everything in your functionality to like go right out the window, at least for a specific period of time. And until it's resolved, it makes sense that it's hard to find your footing if nothing has really changed for you.
Mhm.
But here we are. And so often this resolves once the person either adapts to the situation or the situation changes. So if there's a job loss and the person gets a new job, or if there's a breakup and the person either is set, with their new life situation and with a bunch of friends and is stable, or finds themselves in a new relationship. Um, but again, this becomes a lot more complicated when we're talking about grief. So anyone who's ever lost somebody understands that grief doesn't ever go away. It doesn't ever poof into thin air. And no one gets to tell us how long we get to grieve somebody. No one gets to tell us how much pain we're allowed to feel for the loss of somebody that was so important to us in our lives. And it's a natural response to loss to experience depression, especially the death of someone very close to you and someone who you loved very much. It is going to include deep sadness and endless crying and insomnia and changes in your appetite. Unlike depression, grief can really come in waves. So in the beginning of the episode, I gave the example of Shiva, right? Like, so you can find yourself in the week of hell, but there's a giggle and a smile, and grief really will come in ups and downs, and it can hit you like a ton of bricks, and then the next day you can be okay. And this is just what grief is. It can be mixed with positive experiences and positive memories. It does not include persistent self loathing or inability to envision a future. So, if you are experiencing those, we might find ourselves in a different category. Again, the difficulty envisioning a future, I also struggle with, because I do find a lot of the times when we find ourselves in these types of situations, in those moments, it's like, which way is up. It is really hard to think forward, but the goal is that eventually, as we adjust, which is why it's an adjustment disorder, we are able to, move forward and envision a future for ourselves. When grief becomes depression, so let's talk about like the way to differentiate this a little bit. If symptoms last longer, than you expected or than you're comfortable with, if it's getting significantly worse over time, if it's leading to self-harm or suicidal ideation, if it's become very complicated grief or has evolved into major depressive disorder, this is really where we want to be a little bit more concerned and definitely seek more help and make sure we're getting treated appropriately. An important distinction is that grief is like love with nowhere to go, and depression is a disconnection from yourself and your joy and your future. And I do think that somebody who experiences grief may have both. So if you're finding yourselves struggling with this space, I don't blame you. Sometimes I, as a therapist, also struggle with some of these points. Um,
Mhm.
but grief really honors what we've lost, and depression just lives in like the lies about feeling like there's literally nothing left.
Yeah.
So when somebody passes and somebody says, I have nothing left to live for, and not to invalidate that, that truly may be a person's experience, but that's what we're talking about. That's when a person has truly hit depression, and that is
Mhm.
beyond what grief in its own may be.
hmm And I was just looking up while you were talking to make sure I got the authors right. There is a great book for anyone who the grief, when you're talking about grief, it's something that you are attaching to and you want to learn more about. There is a phenomenal book. It's called On Grief and Grieving, and the authors are Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. And this is something that if you are experiencing grief, you want to learn more about it, it's an amazing book. And this goes if you lost someone due to death, due to a breakup, it doesn't even have to be losing someone. It could be grieving situations, grieving loss of, like you said, a job or things
Mhm.
like that. So if you want to learn more about it, it's probably something we'll end up talking about even more in depth in another session at some point. But that is a great resource, and I will put that in the show notes as well.
Yes, and
So,
I'll add to that. Sorry, Steph. Another wonderful book for anyone experiencing grief is a book called Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. It's also a really wonderful book. So many helpful tips in there. I've actually had some clients who found it very helpful who were not even going through grief. Just really incredible um, mindset tools and skills around moving forward when your option A version of life, wasn't happening. So an incredible read as well.
Okay, I love the recommendations. It's always awesome. So, just want to address quickly, even though this is a huge topic in and of itself, but the dangers of depression being untreated. So, of course, we have the risk of suicidality and self harm in depression. So, we want to make sure that if someone is struggling with depression, we are aware of that and we are treating appropriately, and we can recognize the signs. We might be more clued in to signs that one of these things might be happening in terms of what you are thinking about or actually acting upon. And that is something we want to make sure we're addressing. Obviously, depression, huge impact on your life's functioning through work, relationships, physical health, mental health, all of those things we want to make sure we're addressing. And that's important to know what we're treating. And we want to also validate that you're experiencing this. So there are, like we talked about at the beginning of the session, that there are cultural stigmas sometimes. Sometimes it's really easy to minimize what you're experiencing. And when we have a label for it, sometimes that could be limiting, but also when we have it in balance, we can recognize, no, this is what I'm going through. That doesn't mean I am a victim to it. It just means that this is who I am, what I'm dealing with right now, and this is what I have to overcome. So when we have a label for it, it can sometimes help us to, okay, this is not me. This is something I'm going through, and that is tremendously helpful to be able to get through something.
So let's talk about what helps. We're talking about something depressing. So, what helps treatments for depression? So, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, um, dialectical behavioral therapy can help as well in terms of skills and tools, and
Mhm.
EMDR for trauma based depression people find really helpful. IFS can be very helpful. But also remember that your rapport, your relationship with your client, with your therapist and your client in itself is so strong for a client to be seen and heard and held during that time. Group therapy for shared experiences and shame reduction, especially when this is comorbid with addiction disorders. The group therapy setting, and so much of it comes from horrific situations and horrible traumas if they find themselves in depression and then develop the addiction. But in general, with depression, group therapy and group therapy in general is such a powerful, powerful thing to sit there and feel seen and heard and not alone. And just reducing that shame and that feeling of it's just me and I'm crazy. So if you think that you're someone that could benefit from group therapy, this is also something that might financially benefit you because it tends to be cheaper than individual therapy. Please look out. Sometimes there are free groups available. Look online. That can be really helpful as well. Obviously, medication, and Steph and I have done an episode on medication. This is absolutely a time to look into medication. There is a time and a place. This is the time and the place. We're talking about SSRIs, SNRIs, mood stabilizers for bipolar. We can go on and on, but it's so important to see a psychiatrist and to see a psychiatrist who's going to talk to you, not just a primary care physician and not just a psychiatrist who's going to see you for 0.3 minutes, give you a bunch of pills, and then send you out the door. So I'm just going to make that very, very clear. But this is definitely a time where medication can really help pull you out of that pit and actually be able to even utilize the things that you're doing in therapy.
Yeah. And just quickly to say about that, we understand that when you're going through depression, that it's so difficult to just like do the things that you need to do. And specifically in finding a psychiatrist, it can be so difficult in and of itself. So be patient with yourself, do your best trying to get your resources together, like your family together, helping you to find someone that could be helpful because it could be a hard thing in and of itself, just doing anything, but then finding someone and sometimes it's difficult when it comes to psychiatrists. I'll just to finding them and getting an appointment set up in the foreseeable future. I'll just leave it at that. So a couple of lifestyle things that could be helpful for depression. Of course, sleep hygiene is incredibly important. Sleep regularity is so crucial, even more than sleep amount. It's actually more important to try your best to go to sleep at the same time and wake up around the same time within an hour, ideally. Than it actually is how much sleep you get, which is I learned actually in that continuing education course, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty crazy, but it's true. Movement, of course, if you're struggling with an eating disorder, be mindful about that. But we want to find mindful movement, ways to move our bodies, get up and move. Sun, we talked about that, getting out, getting some sunlight, getting into nature, connection with others or with a greater purpose. Obviously, you guys know where we stand. Rachel is an Orthodox Jew. I'm a Christian. So that could be, if one of those align with you or religion aligns with you, definitely seeking that out and prayer and whatever it looks like in your context. That's great. Nutrition, making sure that you're nourishing yourself regularly with meals that are balanced and that, again, regular meals, making sure you're hydrating. And here's the thing that I always say, the antidote to depression is doing the exact things it's telling you not to do. It's a mountain. So it feels as though everything that I know I just said a bunch of things that you can do. And for someone who is experiencing depression, it's probably like they're just going to shut this off. So here I want you to know that if you're experiencing depression, pick one thing, just do something that you could try to work on. And it does not have to be big at all. Maybe your biggest win of the day is getting out of bed. Maybe it's putting on pants. Maybe it's brushing your teeth. But if you have things to do, one of the ways that one of the examples I like to give is if you have depression and you're looking at a sink full of dishes that you have to wash, and that could just seem like an insurmountable task. Can you get up and wash one? Maybe you'll be inclined to wash two. And if that's all you do, put it away, and then you could try again. But just doing something to go against the depression, to say, no, I'm working against it. And again, this is so much easier said than done because depression makes it very, very difficult. So I am saying this with the utmost understanding in that. But anything that you could try to do just to move the needle forward a little bit, and that might look very different day to day. So most importantly, be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself. Any type of coping skills that you can get your hands on that you know has worked, that other people recommend, any way that you could try to incorporate it. Don't overwhelm yourself. We don't want you shutting down. Just pick one, the tiniest thing that you could think of that could be helpful for you. And that is really, really important. Remember, depression is absolutely not a personal failure. It's sometimes part of the human condition. And there is no gold medal for suffering in silence. So reach out and get help. There's no harm in doing that, and there's no judgment in that either.
Okay, so let's do a few key takeaways. Now, I know this is a little bit hard because we've covered so much material in this space, and each version of depression, it's a whole thing in and of itself, but there is a difference between feeling sad and feeling depressed. And there are different types of depression, all which are valid. Keep in mind some of the things that we talked about in terms of what to watch out for, how long this is lasting, how much this is impacting your level of functionality. And what I also want to keep in mind, what I want people to keep in mind is if you're finding yourself struggling and you're like, I don't think I fall under any of these categories, still get help. You don't have to suffer. I don't care if you don't fall under any diagnosis. You still deserve to live your best life and feel good and feel happy. And if you're experiencing any of this at all, if you're suffering at all, you don't have to. We want to help you. Let us help you. And you deserve to be helped and you deserve to feel better. In that, I really want to invite our listeners to reflect on if they have been minimizing symptoms that they may have been experiencing. All the feelings and all the forms are valid. And I really cringe at this sentence as a therapist. So sorry to therapists that overuse this ever, like all the time. But if there's ever a time to use it, this is the time that I use it. Like, this is where we hold space for you. This is where we hold a time to sit with you and cry and hear you and validate you and help you find your way through the darkness back into the light.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's so important to reach out to get help. That's just really what we hope that you're getting out of this session, that it can look depression and different types of depression could look so many different ways. And it's important for you to get help if you are suffering in any way. You don't have to meet a criteria or a diagnosis. So that brings us to our listener's question. Again, as you all know, and as a reminder, if you want to have a chance to have one of your questions answered in one of our next sessions, you could send in a listener question. You can either email it over to us at coffeeandcounselingpodcast@gmail.com or send it over to us on Instagram at coffeeandcounselingpodcast. And today's listener's question is, why do I keep ending up in one-sided friendships? And some of my initial thoughts with that is I find that this happens a lot with people who struggle with boundaries, who are overextending themselves time and time again, and perhaps has even found an identity in what they're able to offer. That usually could come along with having low feelings of self-worth, that all you can offer a friendship or a relationship is what you can do and what you can give to them. I see this actually a lot with certain family, having grown up in certain family dynamics where perhaps, and I hate to use this term because it's so overused and incorrectly used in our world, but a child of a narcissistic parent. And obviously as therapists, unless we're seeing that person, we can't diagnose someone. So it's really difficult to say, oh, you're a child of a narcissistic parent. And most people who are actually falling into the category of narcissism are not going to seek out therapy to get diagnosed with narcissism. So that's a little bit complicated. That's a whole other topic in and of itself. But I often see that this dynamic happens where the person has a parent that has qualities that are consistent with narcissism and perhaps had to bear a load that was just too much as for being a child. And that would be my short take on that. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
There's no way to answer this quickly. So the
I tried.
But I'm going to say this, and I'll just give you something to think about. Don't be so quick to give somebody the title of a friend before they do what they need to do to deserve that title. And so often, especially the kind of people who wear their hearts on their sleeves, give it out left and right. And when people don't meet your expectations, that's where we end up finding ourselves in this space. So before you give your heart out and before you call someone your friend or your best friend or whatever it is, give them the opportunity to prove to you that it goes both ways. Because in order for it to be a friendship, it cannot be one-sided.
Perfect. So today we are asking our listeners to reflect on this question. What would it feel like to treat your symptoms as real and worthy of care rather than something to explain away or minimize? If this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone close to you or bringing it into therapy if you're in treatment. You don't have to figure it out alone. And please, if you have any answers to those reflection questions that you'd like to share with us, you could do so. Again, you could send them over to our email, coffeeandcounselingpodcast@gmail.com, or send it over to us on Instagram, which we hope you're following, by the way, at Coffee and Counseling Podcast. Anything we discussed today that you want to link to, it'll probably be in the show notes down below. So check that out. And we thank you for joining us today. And we hope that you join us again next Tuesday for our next session.
Before we close out today's session, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that if anything we shared today brought up difficult emotions, or if you're struggling with thoughts of suicide, you are not alone and help is available. If you're in an immediate crisis or feel unsafe, please go to your nearest emergency room. If you're in the United States, you can also call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7. If you're listening outside the U.S., please contact your local emergency number or mental health crisis line. Support is available in many countries, and you're not alone. If you're experiencing suicidal thoughts but are not in immediate danger, consider reaching out to a mental health professional, speaking with your doctor, or confiding in someone you trust. Depression can feel isolating, but there are people who care and want to help. Your life matters, and you don't have to go through this alone. Thank you so much for being with us today. Please follow our Instagram at Coffee and Counseling Podcast and send any questions you have about any topic to us via direct message for a chance for your question be featured in one of our next sessions. You can also email us your questions or topic suggestions at coffeeandcounselingpodcast@gmail.com. Make sure to check out some of our other sessions available to you right now. Once you drink up all of those and your coffee, come back next Tuesday for our next session.
The information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute therapy or mental health advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish a therapeutic relationship between you and the hosts. If you are in need of support, we encourage you to seek help from a qualified mental health professional. This podcast is not a substitute for individualized care. We do offer individualized therapy. If you're interested in individual therapy with one of us, please visit our practice websites and send us an email to set up a free consultation call. All of the links and our contact info will be in the show notes.